Okay, good. So I can see that the recording has started again, so we can recommence. I'm just going to give people a couple of minutes. I can just see people are coming back in, so I'll just... Here we go. Okay, right. I am going to get us moving again. So we are on item number 5 of our agenda. Oh, sorry, hang on. So just checking, can people hear me? I think my internet's gone a bit squiffy. You can, okay. Sorry, apologies. Right, so item number 5, this is our integrated performance and quality report. Obviously, all of this gets scrutinised in our various committees at a slightly more detailed level, but this is a good opportunity for us as a whole board to take some assurance and challenge and look at our performance in a bit across the board. So I'm going to invite David to take us through this in the usual fashion. David, I will hand over to you for a while.
Thanks, Sarah, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the favourite section of our board meeting today. The IPQR report is for your review and assurance today. And as Sarah mentioned, it goes through clinical governance, financial resources, performance, and staff governance committees prior to coming, but recognise that for colleagues who don't join those subcommittees, then this is the opportunity to look at performance overall. I suppose I'm encouraged this morning as we went through the minutes of the previous subcommittees at the earlier section. There were many references to some of the data that's already contained within this, so it shows that these things and conversations are joined up in the right way. The executive summary is in page 79, and maybe if I can just talk to a few things from it. Maybe talk about the items that we are escalated for as a board. The first is around vaccinations. You'll see that the vaccination report that you have today still is only reflecting COVID vaccinations, but the next report that will go to FRP will also be representative of childhood vaccinations, which has got a particular focus for us at the moment, and indeed has been a focus area for the recent peer review that we've had with Public Health Scotland. So secondly, CAMS is another area of escalation. You'll see there's slight improvement in performance in this month, and then page 84 is a more detailed report, but it does show a context of sustained reduction in long waits, and that's bodes well for our future performance. As those long waits come down, then we concentrate on the front end of that review, and therefore our performance will increase quite rapidly when that takes place. And then finally, psychological therapies. We've reported in past meetings that we've got sustained improvement, and indeed we are one of the highest performing mainland boards, and the report is there in page 99, and discussions around de-escalation with Scottish Government are ongoing at the moment in terms of that performance, so hopefully we'll be able to see some progress on that. In terms of other areas, I think Fiona mentioned in her remarks around the ED performance, and while it's sustained, it is still reflects a system that is under pressure, but still compares favourably with other boards across the country. TTG and outpatients, although it's showing red, we talked about funding earlier on, and in the end trajectories that we forecasted for the year, there were some assumptions made around the funding coming in and the end result in terms of overall performance. is reflected in the year end, but we will need to do some better profiling so that, because it doesn't recognise that there'll be a slower start based on the funding coming through, and then a more rapid and accelerated activity once that is enacted. So we'll reprofile those and be able to provide that through FP&R, as well as coming back to the board here. It will show a more accurate trajectory. Cancer performance is relatively stable for both 31 and 62 days, with the relatively small number. 62 tends to be the most volatile and indeed the most difficult to achieve, because it also recognises our interaction with other boards for some of those services. And further down we have radiology and endoscopy, which again is performing well, and that's recognised when we compare with the performance related to other boards. We have our clinical performance and quality slides, and that includes complaints data as well as data around infection control, recognising that some of that data, there is a time lag when these reports are available and when these metrics are available to us. And then finally, around our people metrics, again, we've referred to them. Vacancy time to fill is still an area of focus. It has at least stabilised in terms of that performance. A slight decrease, but still is an area where we would like further improvement. Again, in that area, absence recording compliance is improving, which is also helpful to managing attendance. And Gareth has also provided a narrative at the end of the report today, recognising he's not with us today, and hopefully that might anticipate some questions that may be asked. So with that, I will open it up for questions from board members, and also look for my fellow executive colleagues to assist in answering the questions. So thank you. Alistair, can I come to you first, please? Are you on mute, Alistair? I'm assuming so. I can't hear Alistair unless that's just me. No, you're on mute, Alistair.
Alistair might be. I think he's having some problems with his mute unmute.
Okay, I'll come back to you, Alistair, if I may, and I'll go to Alex first. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, David. Yeah, a couple of things. One, the obvious one, when you look at the executive summary, is the ADP is virtually all red, apart from one green one, which is not good. But the explanations are there, so that's not just a comment and a question. It's a shame Gareth wasn't in, because there are a couple of questions on that. But the one that does bother me, and he didn't actually make a comment in his narrative, was the fact that the appraisals are only sitting at 28%. Now, is that a timing issue? Because I can't believe that 3/4 of our staff, or almost 3/4 of our staff, haven't had appraisal. That doesn't seem right to me. So, you know, what's that number actually telling us? Is it right for a start? And again, is there any? Because there's no improvement; it's just flatline by the look of it. And the other one was for Louise about the falls. There was a mention in your narrative about Rosebank Wing. Is there lessons from that particular exercise that can be taken through to some of our other hospitals? Thanks.
Thanks, Alex. In terms of appraisals, then what was agreed was that we would focus particularly on senior management appraisals and getting them in place to a level of compliance. Perhaps we need to think about how we can report them as a subset of the whole, but recognising the ambition to roll that out. It was a topic of conversation within staff governance as well. And there will be a scheduling issue. They will get done throughout the year, but recognising the importance of that. I'm happy to take that back so that that feeds back into the subcommittee later, if that's okay. Louise, can I come to you with regard to the question around falls, please?
Yes, indeed. And as you'll see, what second only to Regmore, Caithness General is our highest area for falls, hence that particular focus on what we need to do differently. And you're absolutely right, there is lessons to learn across the organisation, because as you will see, Belford have done really, really well with their reduction in falls work, and Evelyn Gray is leading for falls across the whole organisation, which helps to give us that consistency of approach and how do we learn lessons from one area to the other. So yeah, the answer is absolutely, we're looking at what can we do differently, understanding that different environments have their own different challenges, as do the patient population, but there are similarities and equivalents that we can take from learning from elsewhere.
Thanks, Louise. Thanks for your question, Alex. Alistair, we'll give that another try, will we? No, that looks like he's still frozen. Okay, I'm going to come to Bert if I can.
Yes, thank you, David. Probably a question for Boyd in relation to the complaint activity. And the paper describes the factors which have influenced the complaint volumes and performances. What caught my eye was one or two of the factors which influence performance, namely quality of investigation and responses requiring multiple redrafts, which is all going to add to time delays, as explained in the paper, of course. So further on, excuse me, the paper tells us about recommendations for improving the quality of complaint handling, one of which is to provide training on drafting a quality response, which is understandable given what has been alluded to in the earlier part of the paper. The recommendations don't, however, make any mention of steps being taken to improve the quality, perhaps the robustness of the investigation. And I just wondered if there is a view on that, because some of the reasons for the delays, it does talk about the quality of the investigation. So are we satisfied with the processes that are in place for the investigations, the robustness? And just interested to hear Boyd's thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I'll pick that up. So I guess it's trying to capture or summarize what are a great many different individual complaints and see the patterns. Therefore, to give a sort of more generalized response to that, because every case is a bit different, we do see those signing off complaints, usually chief officer and immediate reports to chief officer level. When they get to the point of signing off, they will identify elements of the complaint response where they have questions and would like to see something else or have some other information covered. And then that is then pushed back out for that additional input. And so I think that is what it's referencing now. Some of that is obviously will cover areas where staff might be able to learn from that and know what might be anticipated next time. One of the difficulties can be, though, that because each complaint is different and some are the same common themes, but many are not. It's not always an immediate learn for staff that they will know automatically next time, because there might not be a next time for a particular unique circumstance. And so I think, therefore, it continues to be a work in progress, and where appropriate, any training or feedback is given in order to help staff, because this is part of the overall service delivery, looking at patient experience where it hasn't been so good and responding to that comprehensively, and also taking away any improvements or system changes is all part and parcel. So on the other aspect, sometimes the delays are because complaints are complex, and they're complex either because of the clinical nature of whatever it was that was happening, or they're complex because for clinical cases, the care will pass through many individual professionals, and their pathway input will be there, and a manager who's investigating to get a complaint response assembled will necessarily have to go to sometimes quite a large number of staff and await responses from all of them, cross-reference. There'll always be somebody on holiday or whatever that delays. And so these human and logistical factors do play in as well, which adds to the challenge of getting everything done and getting it done within time and ensuring as best possible quality as well.
Thanks, Boyd. Thanks for your question, Bert. Will I try Alistair one more time, Alistair? You may not be able to put your hand up, but let's see if you can come in now.
Okay. All right, I'm sorry about that. I've switched to a different machine. I hope you can hear me. I think this report is evolving, but I would like to see if we can try taking it to the next level. And I suppose looking at it, one of the points might be, so what? We've got this report, we've had it for quite a few meetings now, and maybe we should be looking at trajectory as to when things will be back on track, because the summary does show an awful lot of red or not meeting requirements or breaching national conditions. I note in the report it talks about improvements to be made by September 24, and obviously the NDAS ones I probably take with a big pinch of salt on those ones. And I just wonder if we should have more focus on trying to align what we think a future trajectory would be for some of the things that we're measuring to return it to where we're supposed to be, or where we're expected to be, or where we would like it to be. I appreciate that might need some thought around evaluating what the report might look like in the future. But I think we've evolved this so well, David, under your sort of stewardship. So I think we've got to look to the next step of, okay, this is telling us that we're not quite where we are. It's telling us things we might be doing the next couple of months ahead. But when will we return to where we want to be? And I think maybe it'd be useful to have a discussion around that, maybe at a board development session or at another session as to how we can make this report evolve to the next step, because it is so much better than anything we've had before. And obviously, figures on cancer and other things we're now understanding and getting behind it as a board. I'm sure the clinicians and the medics have always been behind. I think we as a board are now starting to get behind some of this. So I think it's a question of, so what's the next step? Thank you.
Thanks, Alistair. And it's a very fair comment. I think two things. One, in the report, we're trying to be able to provide the information that shows what the actual performance is. But as I mentioned earlier, I think we can improve the way that we show our trajectories and how that the ATP will be delivered and better reflect the timing of that, rather than go into deficit at the beginning of the year and then play catch up all the way through. So we certainly can look at that as to whether that can improve the situation. And certainly from the executive summary part, with regard to our ADP, that would be the opportunity. I think in the wider scope, for the national standards and the national targets, there is no relief from those national targets, while recognising that many boards will find that difficult to achieve, and in some cases have never achieved for a number of years. But hence the reason that's why we try to offset that and be able to give context to that by showing our comparison with other boards. But your point is very valid in terms of how can we get confidence around the actions that we are taking, and how can we get the improvements and demonstrate the improvements through the reports that we're giving, and we certainly can reflect on how we can improve that. and be able to reflect that overall position. So thanks for your question, and happy to take that away and work with my fellow exec colleagues to see where we can better reflect that improvement trajectory. Thanks. Jerry, can I come to you, please?
I'm moving the wrong mouse and wondering why nothing's happening. Thank you, David. I've got a couple of questions, although I would like to come back to Alistair's point about targets actually under the ADP section in terms of where are we actually setting our own internal target, as you rightly say, David, outside of those national targets, which we're very familiar with. But probably a couple of an observation and then a couple of questions for me. Probably start off, I mean, I'm just working through the report in order. I think the ABIs, I think I've raised this, I couldn't quite find in the minute I raised it, but the ABI position in Argyll and Bute does not appear to have got any better. It just seems to have stayed the same. And I just wonder if we could have some, I don't know if it's a data collection issue or we're just not doing it. I think there was something about, we got some wider setting ABIs in Q4, which has been reflected in the report. CAMS, I would be interested in hearing a little bit more about this new process of the engagement appointments and how that actually manifests in itself in the data. And I was actually particularly interested in what happens to the children who, upon completion of the engagement appointment, is not deemed appropriate for CAMS. So is it just sent back to the GP to say, or from wherever the referral came from? And I'm not asking that question in a judgmental way at all. If the clinical opinion is so, it's so. That's the way it is. And I think the other bit about NDAS, I saw the comment about August and September probably being even worse, and it was really just to get some assurance on. I'm assuming that's pending some recruitment, and is that now underway and will be completed for October? And really just a question on NDAS, are the children now just sitting waiting, or are we looking outside of area to refer children to, or is there just no capacity across the system? So that's it. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you, Jerry. I'll come to Evan first with regard to ABIs and Argyll and Bute, and then I'll come to Catherine around CAMS and NDAS, if I may. Evan?
Hi, my apologies. What was the question in relation to ABIs?
Do you want to just repeat that, Jerry? So I'll, rather than me paraphrase you.
I think Evan, it was really just. I think it was really just. We appear to have made no improvement at all in ABI performance in Argyll and Bute, and I'm not sure whether it's just a data collection issue or we genuinely are not doing any ABIs in Argyll and Bute. But it seems to have been down at that very low level for a good while. I think it was probably maybe 12 months ago I asked Tim the question, and I think the answer then was about local enhanced services for 23-24, and I think it's the same sort of answer for 24-25. So I just wonder when we're going to start to see some improvement there. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. I think it's a good question. I probably don't have a good answer for you at this point, other than today we've got a new chair of the Alcohol and Drugs Partnership. And so we're just starting to reform an agenda for that. So I'll make sure that is part of that discussion, and I'll come back with a further update at our next board meeting.
Thanks, Evan. And Catherine, can I come to you? And again, you may call on Louise for the clinical element of the question, but Catherine?
Yeah, so the engagement appointment process is about ensuring that we are targeting our resources as effectively as possible, and also so that we're not wasting children's and families' time in terms of them waiting for something that actually is not going to add value to them. Where there is a need, then obviously they will be signposted to the relevant service or the support that's available. So that is the approach. And again, Louise is, from a clinical perspective, much better qualified to talk to the detail of these things than I am. So Louise, feel free to come in on that if you think I've misrepresented any of that at all. And then I'll talk about the INDAS.
Thanks. No, not at all. And I think it is a challenge because ultimately we've got that in lots of different areas around how we respond in that time. I don't think there's an easy answer. It is about looking what else is available and what support we can offer in the meantime across the partnership.
Thanks, Louise. And in terms of INDAS, so yes, absolutely. We're looking at needing to recruit capacity into the service. The service was relying on a number of single-handed practitioners, and obviously that always gives us challenges. Jerry, you'll understand that in terms of service continuity when that happens. However, we've been going through a really detailed exercise working with clinical leadership in and around the professions that provide to INDAS to understand what an alternative model might be. And all boards are looking at what might be a better model than people waiting for assessment. The issue actually is getting the right support in to children at the right point in time to respond to the circumstances that they're facing. The assessment is about, assessing where children are on the autistic spectrum disorder and getting a response to that. And that doesn't always add value to those individuals. So a lot of work is going on there. Highland Council are mapping out all of the resources that they have to respond to neuro development requirements, and a lot of that, as you'll understand, sits in educational services, as well as some elements sitting within children's health services within the Highland Council. And within health, we're looking at how that maps across both our CAMS and our community paediatric service, so that we can ensure that that is as responsive as possible. And then we're looking at really understanding that assessment service, really understanding what resources are required to support the assessment service, and ensuring that we've got really clear communication for families and children that might want to take the option of going through the assessment service to understand where they fit. And some people want that more than others. The really important part is to get the support in through the GERFEC model, and you'll understand that is about putting the children at the centre and considering what they need right here, right now, across education and health. So hopefully that helps. In terms of the actual waiting times for that assessment service, we're looking at how might we respond to that, given the volume of referrals that we have in the service. There's a lot of approach that we've done in other areas where we're challenged with waiting list, really ensuring that the waiting lists are cleansed, that everybody on the waiting list still wants to access that service, because in some cases that might have moved on. And where that is required, really responding to those children that are at the upper age brackets so that they can understand that before they transition out away from being in mainstream education and in a more supportive environment. So there is a lot going on in terms of the response to the INDAS circumstance, including engaging with other board areas to understand what that looks like. Sorry, David, I've probably taken longer than I should have done on that, but I thought it was important for the board to hear all those points. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. Nicola, I hadn't noticed your hand up. Did you want to come in on something to provide answer?
Yes, thank you very much. If I may, David and Evan, it was related to the ABI trends in Argyll and Bute. We discussed with Tim beforehand and with the Argyll and Bute public health colleagues as well. And it has been, I mean, I don't have much to add to what has just been said. As in the new leadership being established, as well as the chair. We also have the new Alcohol and Drug Partnership Coordinator, Argyll and Bute. And then there is an issue with data capture as well, which makes a consistent data trend difficult to analyze, but obviously we're working on that as well.
Thanks, Nicola. Okay, thank you. Sarah, can I come to you?
Thanks. I've got a question and a comment, but then also some feedback as well. So my question actually might have to come, David, to yourself or Fiona, or maybe Nicola, because I know Tim's not here, and it is around the work that we're doing with vaccines. So I know that we obviously touched on earlier the fact that we will get some full reports to our various governance committees in due course around the options appraisal work that is going on, but I just thought it was important to pick it up under the IPQR, because we obviously have a section around vaccination. So I wondered if somebody could just tell the board a little bit more about the timescales that we're looking at around the options appraisal work, and I suppose that's partly around the timescales of that programme of work, but partly also around our readiness for winter. We know that's very important, so I wanted an update on the timescales, and I suppose picking up a little bit about Alistair's point and something to do with the presentation of this, and we maybe can think about this, David, in our future iterations of the IBQR. I know that sometimes we are able to provide specific timescales, and sometimes we talk about things being an ongoing programme of work, as we have done under the vaccine section. But I do think it's important that we make those specific and measurable, particularly in areas where we're under pressure, vaccines specifically in this case. I think it's important that we pin down some specific timescales in the IPQR presentation so that we can come back to that in future. But yeah, if I could get an update on the timescales around the options appraisals, and then I'll come back in, if that's okay, with some positive feedback too.
Sure, thanks. I'm going to come to Pam, if I can, just to talk through the question around vaccinations, please.
Thank you. So we have got our vaccine improvement plan in place, which is really robust with a good project methodology. We've got 28 improvement actions, and these have been pulled through from an action plan we provided in November that we updated in May, and that we have, in light of the feedback from Public Health Scotland, fully refined. And the first part of that has been to pull through significant actions of improvement at pace. So we have got the action plan online to complete by the end of October, and the vaccine improvement group has been meeting weekly. Since the 4th of August, then we've had a short-lived working group specifically working on the options appraisal. And part of that is to look at the delivery of the vaccines across general practice population areas. So there's been a questionnaire has gone out to general practice with a very good response rate. We've got over 90% of responses in now, so we hope to do an analysis within the next 4 weeks that will give us the outcomes of what that's beginning to look like in terms of our future delivery model. And then we've got the ongoing process of the winter programmes, the autumn and winter programmes coming on board. So we're still setting ourselves up within the current processes just to be sure that we've got actions in place, but we're hoping that we may have different arrangements in terms of the timeline going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Pam.
Thanks. No, that's helpful, and obviously, the detailed scrutiny that will take place at committees notwithstanding. I just wanted to share some positive feedback on. I did a visit to various departments in Rigmore not so long ago, and I know we have talked about it before at board, but I think it's worth reminding people that the work is ongoing in the endoscopy department, working towards their JAG accreditation, and I think we have talked about it before at board, but I had the opportunity to visit the department, and they explained to me in some detail the huge amount of work that is going into that, and it's a really, really positive. Lots of work, really, really positive, and I just wanted to share that with everybody because I was so impressed, and yeah, it was really quite something. So I just wanted to share that at this point.
Good, thank you, Sarah. I'm sure Catherine will also feed that back to the team as well. Emily, you have a question for us.
Thanks, David. One specific question, one more general one, if that's okay. In relation to NDAS, I know we've got a lot of people that, given their current age, may not get assessed prior to, I suppose, aging out of the CAMS sphere, if you like. Have we got any idea, I guess similar to the question that Jerry asked, what happens if they don't get assessed before? What happens to the people who don't actually go through that process before they turn 18 and before they then fall into adult services? And is anybody capturing, I guess, the potential harms or just the outcomes where we don't get to the point of actually assessing someone, just given the current wait times, that you can see that that's going to happen for a significant proportion of those currently on the waiting list? So that's my first question. The second one is more a general one in relation to the time lag of the data. So obviously we're end of July just now, and a lot of the data in the report is March, April time. I appreciate there's a huge amount of work that goes into collating this, and I realise that this is probably a bigger issue than it appears, but is there any way that we could get the data sooner? Or I guess I would presume we have our finger on the pulse in other ways, and it's just really a question of how confident are you that we can still react to issues quickly if we're not seeing the data until 3-4 months after the month in question? Thank you.
I'll answer the second question first, and then I'll come back to Catherine, if I may. So some data is not available to us, and that's some of the nationally reported data, and I mentioned that around infection control. But actually, for most of the other data, the operational teams are dealing with much more up-to-date information. It's a factor of the information being prepared and then going through subcommittees before it comes to board. Or else we get out of sequence where the board is presented with data that's not been through subcommittees. So I think we previously discussed that the idea is not necessarily here to review the most recent data, but rather from a governance point of view, be satisfied that the overall trends and performance has been managed, and recognising that there is more accurate data. You'll be glad to hear that is available to the services as they take their actions. So hopefully that's helpful. I'm happy to discuss out with the meeting if that's helpful. Catherine, can I come back to you around NDAS, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So before children are added to the NDAS list, there is an examination, particularly to understand whether they have any mental health requirements and support to them in that regard, and that then signpost them in through the CAMS service, Emily. So there is a degree of support there. We are going to be undertaking a detailed review of what is on the waiting list, and the strategy and transformation team, Lorraine's team, is supporting me with providing some additional information, and we will certainly be looking at outcomes and learning. What is becoming more and more evident is that, the GERFIC approach is the most important. It's about wrapping the support around the child in the moment, not putting them onto a waiting list and waiting for something. And just as a reminder, this is an assessment service. It shouldn't be a treatment service, and we're looking at that. It will need to have disposal routes, obviously, so that when things are identified, children and families can access the appropriate service. But this is an assessment service, and we're going back to basics in terms of really understanding what that means and how we organise ourselves to provide for that. And I think some of that over time has got a little bit lost, and that might be why we're having the challenges that we're having within the service.
Thanks, Catherine, and hopefully that's helpful, Emily. Anne, can I come to you now, please?
So I'd like to pick up on Alistair's point that he raised earlier in the meeting, and put in a slightly different but maybe similar sort of challenge to ourselves. I absolutely agree. I think it's really important that we continue to develop what we're doing with this report. I know that Lorraine loves a challenge, So despite the fact that some days I think she must be tearing her hair out at the constant requests for looking at this something differently, I'm sure she's up to the challenge, but it's as much a challenge for us as it is for our executive colleagues. So some of you will know that I've been championing within the board the Frugal Governance Initiative, recognising the pressures that are in the system and that time is a very valuable resource. So I suppose I'm partly coming at it from that perspective. And I think we need to ask ourselves, how do we at the board add value in discussing this report onto the work that is ongoing in the committees? I think it's absolutely right, as David mentioned earlier, that when we're discussing this, any member of the board should be able to ask a question about any of the information. But I suppose I'm also thoughtful, and it has just occurred to me, prompted by Alistair's question, to think about all this anew, that perhaps we need to think a bit differently about what we focus on when we discuss the report at board level. Should we be making more use of the reports at the start of our meeting about the committee work in relation to this report, so that we can focus perhaps on areas of escalation more, or focus on areas where perhaps the organisation has some difficult choices to make about different approaches to the balance between finance and performance. So I hope that people can understand where I'm coming from here, but I think that really I'm supporting Alistair's suggestion that we should have some sort of discussion, and perhaps a development session, and challenge ourselves anew as to how we can continue to continue that improvement that has been made over the last few years in how we're addressing this report at board level. Thanks.
Thanks. And I'm sure I can let Sarah come back and talk to the opportunity around, together as a board, how we approach the IPQR. And I think you've made some interesting suggestions in terms of how we might do that. I think it's always useful to challenge ourselves around this, around the data, and constantly look at it fresh. So there is a healthy aspect of refreshing the reports and looking at it from different angles. It never will be perfect and it never will be finished, but sometimes that objective assessment can be really helpful. I mean, if I can speak personally and probably on behalf of the other exec directors, we look at this information on a regular basis and discuss it on a regular basis, but always appreciate the questions that are asked and what becomes of interest to you and what you're seeing from the data and what your interested questions are. So some of them confirm the questions that we're asking of our teams. Sometimes you're asking questions that we don't necessarily have thought of from that angle. So I think that's certainly the value that I see in it. But in terms of how it's reviewed, how it's reported, I think those are definitely always up for discussion and review. Thanks. And Sarah, will I come to you? And then I'll go to Karen.
Yeah, I was just going to bring it, and I think this is a topic that we're constantly debating, isn't it? And I think, part of the role of the board is that constant, trying to find the sweet spot between staying at a high enough level that we can maintain the broadest strategic overview of the whole organisation and allowing our various other governance structures to do their work, in detail. Balancing that with the desire to look at things in detail so that we feel confident that we've scrutinized something well enough and that we understand it well enough. So there is that constant toing and froing. And I think a little bit, tying with what Anne said and back to what Alistair said, it's a constant evolution and a constant kind of, pendulum swing almost between those two lenses, just to update people on some stuff that's happening in the background that links in with this. So we have been having ongoing discussions around, obviously, the work that Anne has been leading on around frugal governance, but complementary to that, the work that we want to do around our programme of development work that the board undertakes, so the sort of the workshops and the learning that we do and how those things work together. Just to say that I'm also getting support from NES, so colleagues in National Education Scotland, who are working with us. They did a bit of work with us around looking at data and trends and the sort of very technical aspects of it, and we're working on the next piece of that, which will kind of complement it in terms of how we mature some of the work that we do in the board, but also in committees, to get that assurance. And I know that Lorraine has been linking in with NES as well to think about how does that translate into our IPQR. So that work is very much in progress, and I hope that we can bring that back for future discussions. But absolutely, I think picking up what Alistair and Anne have articulated today, we can take a discussion offline around what is next for the IPQR and the way that we look at our data within the board, but through that frugal governance lens, so that we make best use of the full range of governance structures that we have. Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah. Finally, but not least, can I come to you?
I hope my question fits within the spirit of the conversation that's just been held. It is in relation to sort of various of the clinical performance data slides, and just a question I have for myself, really, around where there are pathways into Greater Glasgow and Clyde for people who live within Argyll and Bute. I think I've mentioned this before, just trying to understand where that performance data, what assurance we should be taking where that performance data is somewhere in the middle between NHS Highland and Greater Glasgow and Clyde. And I suppose more specifically, can we take assurance that for people whose pathway is into Greater Glasgow and Clyde, for whatever variation of the performance data we're talking about, can we be confident that they are somewhere in the positive end of that? For example, if Greater Glasgow and Clyde has a higher performance data, or actually are they in the lower end and actually they're worse because they've got that pathway into Greater Glasgow and Clyde, and how is that reflected? Obviously, we speak about that in the IJB to some extent, but I know from conversations previously, there's a lot of work going on to try and get more clarity on that data, because we don't have real good data from from that SLA at the minute, and there's a lot of work I know is going on for many years. But I think it's just that what we're seeing on NHS Highland, on that benchmark, kind of overarching benchmark data, is not the whole population of NHS Highland. So that really, I know that's a bit of a bumbling question, but I think it's just about what should we be taking from the presentation that we have today, and how that fits for the people within NHS Highland who have those pathways into Greater Glasgow and Clyde. Does that make any sense?
It does, Karen. And I think in terms of the aggregation of the data, sometimes the data can be aggregated, but as you mentioned, some of the time the data can't be aggregated, and therefore it is the Highland region, if I could describe it that way, position as opposed to the whole of NHS Highland. It very much depends on the pathways as you've described. I'll bring Evan in, and he'll probably talk to a piece of this, but I know that that's been part of the conversation around service level agreement, so that we can get an understanding of exactly what service, not just what the pathway is. But I see Fiona want to come in as well. Fiona.
Thank you, and it may be that Evan can add to what I'm saying, but my understanding from the conversations I'd had on this previously is that in essence the approach in Scotland has been that assurance is provided through where the treatment happens rather than the commissioning body, which is not really language that we would use in Scotland, but you might recognise if you've been in other jurisdictions would be a more normal construction. And that would be true because Greater Glasgow and Clyde, just using them as an example, are providing services into a number of other board areas. Lanarkshire patients, there's a large cohort that receive treatment on certain pathways in Glasgow. And my understanding would be that we haven't really in Scotland come to a system-wide solution of how assurance is provided back to the source of origin, if that makes sense, rather than through where the treatment is happening. Again, there's significant pathway crossings between Fife and Tayside I'm aware of as well. I'm sure there's lots of others that maybe I'm less familiar with. So I think this is something, again, that the National Planning and Delivery Board that have been set up are aware of, because increasingly sources of origin are asking for that assurance for their population rather than just for the people that they're treating. But I don't think that there's a system right across Scotland that would enable that to easily happen just at the moment. But I think that maybe Sarah, through the board chairs network, can bring that to the attention of government as a request. I can do that through board chief executives. But I think that responsibility to our population needs to be better reflected in our access to population data rather than just where people have received treatment.
Thanks, Fiona. Evan, did you want to add anything specifically around that topic?
I think Fiona's highlighted the issues really well, and we can also and are work on that question at the level of Argyll and Bute to Greater Glasgow and Clyde, and we're working with their both the kind of director for the Clyde sector and their planning team to understand a bit more about that that data that kind of reflects what happens to Argyll and Bute people who are in Glasgow. I think we could talk about the SLA issue for the rest of the morning, couldn't we? There's also a bit about how our data is visible to the planning team within Greater Glasgow and Clyde, and how we're making those strategic links and ensuring that their service planning takes account of our demographics and our need and our service data. And there's kind of an ongoing relationship building that we have obviously started and are continuing with them to make sure that we're strategically aligned in that respect.
Thanks, Evan. Hopefully that's helpful. Karen, Nicola's got his hand up. I'm just conscious of time, Nicola.
It will be just 10 seconds, if I may.
Of course.
Sorry. No, I just like to voice my frustration for this scenario. For those small areas where public health are involved with Glasgow and Clyde, sometimes I fail to get a clear picture for our population, mainly Argyll and Bute. So this is extremely frustrating, and I'm glad that glad in the negative sense that it is shared across all other services. And obviously, I hope we can do something about it. Thank you. Sorry.
No, thanks, Nicola. I think it is a challenge across a number of different areas. Sarah, apologies for taking us over time, but let me hand back to you now. Thank you. Thanks for all your questions.
Thanks, David. No, absolutely. And I really welcome the questions that we've had today. I think we've explored a lot of really important topics. So I'm glad that we've had the opportunity to do that. Thanks for steering us through that, David, and thanks to your executive colleagues for answering all the questions. Okay, so just to recap, we are being offered limited assurance. Obviously, there's a wide variety of things within the IPQR, so it's kind of impossible to offer one blanket conclusion about the whole thing. But overall, we're being offered limited assurance, just recognising the sustained pressures both on our own systems and our commissioned care services, and also to consider the level of performance across the system, which I think we have done. Is everybody happy with that before we move on? Fantastic. Thank you very much, everybody. Okay, so this takes us on to item number 6. This is our annual delivery plan. Now, obviously, members will be aware that we have seen sort of draft versions of the ADP in different forums, and there is a bit of a process involved in this, but we are now bringing it in its entirety to the board so that we can approve that and obviously have a bit of discussion about it. But I'm going to invite Lorraine Cowie in to speak to this item, please, and then we can open up for question and comments.
Thank you, Chair. Just got some brief slides for the board, given that it's quite a substantial document and covers an extensive area. So I'll just share my screen. So for the annual delivery plan and medium-term plan for this year, we've detailed within it all the high-level actions for 24-25, and that covers Highland and Argyll and Bute. And I'll invite Evan in just a second to speak about Argyll and Bute process. We've aligned it to the ADP and MTP guidance that was produced by Scottish Government that we got back in January. And we've worked with teams across our system to really understand what the problems are. You'll see there's a lot of problem statements. So what are the things that we're trying to fix, which fits with some of the conversation this morning. And then we've got a clear understanding of our deliverables that we're trying to meet in the system. We've also aligned, which you'll have heard previously through Heleth describing the financial plan and that 3% efficiency savings. We've aligned all the value and efficiency work streams in each of the key areas to give an understanding to the board and reflect the overall financial plan. And we've also looked at that strategic design. So we report to FRP on the progress with strategic design. But we've identified, again, the deliverables that we want to focus on in the second section of each of our well themes. And as we're aware, Argyll and Bute is in the final year of their plan. And I'll just hand over to Evan briefly to speak about that. Evan, are you still on the call?
Thanks, Lorraine. I sure am. Yep. Thanks so much, Lorraine. Yeah, from an Argyll and Bute perspective, our delivery plan links closely to our joint strategic plan. So the last iteration of that covered us from 22 to 25, and that's obviously we're required by statute to create that plan. That's developed in conjunction with our communities and our staff, as you'd expect it should be, and then our delivery plan, that the actions from that fall out of that joint strategic plan. So we're in the final year of our joint strategic plan, and we're just or we are underway with our timeline for the next iteration of that joint strategic plan, and that will be for a 5-year rather than a 3-year period, as agreed with, by our integration joint board. So obviously, we also need to be aware with our delivery plan of the changing context, particularly around the spending review that's awaited this year. And if you go to the next slide, that is just, you'll have all seen this before. That's our plan on a page. So all of the actions in our ADP are linked back to these overall sort of trends and objectives.
Thank you, Evan. And in both the Argyll and Bute and Highland plan, we have aligned them to the 10 NHS Scotland recovery drivers. Scottish Government did obviously recognise that alignment to the joint strategic plan for Argyll and Bute and for Highland, and obviously the work that's been done on the joint strategic plan with the Health and Social Care Partnership. But this is how Together We Care aligns within that recovery drivers in each of our well themes to give a visual of that. And what we've also included within, so this is some key highlights. So these are developed in detail through each of the well themes. But what I've done on these 2 slides is just given the key highlights of the particular areas that we feel we should focus on and through each of the well themes. So just a couple of slides on how that aligns. And also remembering, we mentioned resilience earlier, but there's a lot of obviously support goes into performing and progress well that you will cover within board around realistic medicine and the blueprint and risk that we'll hear about later. So there's also a section within the ADP on these wider areas. So in terms of bringing it together, and I think we've covered some of this morning, we are going to encompass that wider reporting in IPQR that David described about vaccinations, but there are a number of other areas that will reflect all our well themes that will be there for the September board. We also took a recent paper to the Clinical and Care Governance Committee that Joanne chaired, and I'm having discussions with Louise and Boyd about how we bring that performance and that balance to quality and display that overall. Alistair and Anne, I think that you brought up about trajectories and timescales. So as this is coming to board for approval today, then we'll start to reflect that deliverables and timescales in the IPQR aligned to each of the deliverables in the ADP, so that you start to get the alignment and coming together. Also with Jerry and Pam, we've discussed a refreshed approach to reporting within the Health and Social Care Partnership. Definitely learning, Evan, from Argyll and Bute and your approach to that you've taken, and how can we start to develop a more granular level reporting into the Health and Social Care Partnership. So we'll see some of that metrics coming through in the board IPQR. In September, we'll have our first report going to FRP on the progress with the ADP and MTP, and that report is expected to be submitted to Scottish Government in early September, and that will commence our quarterly reporting with SG as well. Katrina mentioned earlier that we couldn't present the ADP to ACF because it hadn't been approved and we hadn't received our feedback, but that is on the agenda for August, as Katrina described earlier, and we engaged with the Area Partnership Forum back in May. There is ongoing work to understand the priorities and that areas of escalation and really dig down deeply and get that transformation. So that is an ongoing piece of work that will be iterative throughout the year. And then we'll continue that joint working with Argyll and Bute, and obviously cognizant of their governance arrangements, but we've agreed 6 monthly awareness reporting into IPQR and alignment with their IJB. So I'll pause there, Chair, and happy to answer any questions along with my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine, and that was really helpful, and it was great to have the Argyll and Bute update in there as well. So I will open up now for questions, comments. Obviously, colleagues have seen this before, but I suppose we're seeing this complete with the information in the X-bar around the feedback that we've had. Okay, I've got Susan followed by Anne. So Susan, I'll bring you in, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Lorraine, for this piece of work. I mean, really solid, great to see how well it's presented and very clear for us to be able to follow it, I think. I mean, I note that you're going to work on how you report on the progress of it and the alignment that needs to come in with the other ways we collect our data and present our metrics. So that's really important. But I wondered if you could just say something about those dates that have already passed in the first quarter. Are we on track with those things that should have already done, the health and wellbeing strategy, the launch of the carers strategy, the launch of the leadership development programme, as examples of ones that have already passed their due dates? Thank you.
So we're doing an analysis of that reporting at the moment. There'll be a report going to EDG in 2 weeks' time that will cover all of that key areas. We've got quite a substantial tracker that we engage with leads on to update and make sure that we are analysing that progress. So that will be the report that goes to, as I described, FRP in September, but we've obviously got internal that David described earlier, a bit similar to the data that goes internally within the teams and the SLTs to make sure that they're on track and they've got their own accountability structures within that.
Thanks, Lorraine. And I wondered, just sorry, I'm going to use Chair's privilege here and just come in with a bit to build on that before I bring others in. I suppose when I was looking through this, you know, as Susan described, it's a huge, you know, comprehensive piece of work, and I have no doubt, Lorraine, I've seen your trackers before, so I know that what will sit behind that in the tracker will be as thorough, and that's fantastic. And I suppose we can take this offline and consider when we think about how we present it back into FRP and through the IPQR. There's something for me about tracking progress against the individual actions, the individual themes and work streams that we've identified, absolutely. and I don't know the answer to this, but there's a question for me around how do we also get assurance around that whole system progress, recognizing that we can't tinker with one bit of the system without it, you know, having an effect somewhere else. And I think obviously we have to break it down into work streams and actions from a you know, a project management perspective. We have to do that so that we can track progress against the different sections. But I think it'd be really handy when we're thinking about this offline to consider how do we then take a bit of a step back and consider the whole system. And because what, you know, as an organisation, we know that bits of NHS Highland don't work independently from the rest of it, and so that's something that I think would be good to have a discussion around. Sorry, I know I totally jumped the gun there and used my free pass. I will bring Anne in next, please.
So thanks, Lorraine, and congratulations on all the compliments that you received back in the feedback from Scottish Government. It was quite tricky to follow the detail in the SBAR and relate that to the detail in the previous drafts and things like that. So I wondered if you could comment on whether any of the specific feedback we received is requiring a change in direction, a delay in other planned actions, a reprioritisation of resources, or was it so detailed that it really didn't have a significant impact on the original intention in the drafts? Thanks.
So I'll just pick that up, Chair. So we got some further detailed feedback specifically on cancer, which I know is something that's frequently raised in board around our approach to the rapid cancer diagnostics. So we've added that in as a specific change. There are currently bids being advertised to apply for funding to support that. So that is an additional area. And they also felt that we needed to have more detail on the understanding of our cancer waiting times performance, which again is a key area raised. So we've added in that particular actions. They also highlighted that around the women's health plan. So we did add, they wanted some more detailed actions within there. We did feel that we had covered that, and we do give support to that. So, but we will feed back to policy colleagues on these particular areas. What happens with the ADP is that it gets dissected and sent to individual policy colleagues who don't always see that read across that Sarah described with other areas. So it's important that we do that internally and make them aware of what's going on in other sections. But they were the two areas I would say, Anne, that did have some additional actions from the previous draft that you've seen.
Okay, but nothing that was taking us away in a different direction from our strategic intent. No, thanks.
No,
okay,
not at all. Thanks.
Thanks, Lorraine. Jerry, I'll bring you in next, please.
Thank you, Sarah. And as promised, I was going to return to Alistair's point about trajectories and targets. I seem to recall, Lorraine, that there was a nightmarish spreadsheet that used to have to get submitted to Scottish Government with targets and all sorts of weird and wonderful calculations. And I'm not asking to see that, but I would find it useful to actually understand what targets we're setting ourselves this year. Obviously, we're familiar with 31 days, 62 days, 4 hours, etc., etc. But if looking specifically, say, using outpatients and TTG as an example, we know we're probably not, almost certainly not going to get to that national target. So where do we expect to be? And what is our trajectory based on achieving, and what is the monthly profile of that? And probably inherent in that as well, as I saw a comment in one of the things in the IPQR about we've got an objective to improve theatre efficiency. So using that as an example, so where are we today and what is our trajectory for improvement? Because it is one of those things where I'm delighted with the document we've got in front of us, and we've approved the financial plan that goes along with that. But what we've strictly not done is actually said these are the board approved trajectories, which are not outside of the national targets. And I think it would be useful to see those, so we can actually again then align that with our performance reporting and how we actually do that going forward. Thank you.
I'll absolutely pick that up along with the deliverables as I've described. I think what we describe in the IPQR is the national targets or the old LDP standards that we've reflected throughout. But I do think that we need to work collaboratively on what is that internal ask of our teams. And I think it's really important that we're able to celebrate success as well. I think it's really challenging. And how do we really put realistic targets? Catherine and I have worked closely, obviously, on the integrated service planning, and through that we've developed that numbers basis of planned care, really, so that teams can celebrate within the resources that they've got. And we are looking at that, as you're aware, across the system so that we can celebrate that success. But obviously I will continue to develop that, and hopefully by September we'll have that in a bit more detail, Jerry, through the individual governance committees.
Thanks, Lorraine. And I think that conversation is really important as well, because as professionals across the organisation, everybody wants to deliver 100% all the time. And I think it is really important, as you described, celebrating success within our resources and within what's realistic and possible. And I think that is a really valuable conversation to be having, both from a governance and assurance and a quality perspective, but also in terms of all of our staff that are delivering services, and what does success look like really on the ground day to day. What is that, and how do we look at that in a balanced way? So I think that's a really important thing to take forward. Okay, I've got Emily next, and then Alex after that. So Emily, I'll bring you in, please.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks, Lorraine. And I don't underestimate the huge amount of work that's gone into that document. You can see the level of detail that's there. And my question is really about what happens next. So obviously buy-in is going to be essential from people across the organisation to deliver the actions and the work streams that are outlined in the ADP. I think it's quite an easy to understand document. It's hard to argue with any of the deliverables that are in there, but it is quite long. I just wondered if there's a kind of joint approach with comms to distilling it down a little bit and helping to communicate it across the organisation so that everybody understands, one, what are the key points of what are we working towards, but also how that relates to their team and their role. Because obviously we're a huge organisation where we kind of need everyone to know what we're doing and what we're working towards. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily. And I think that was raised definitely at Staff Governance Committee and at the Area Partnership Forum about how we communicate this out. We are developing that comms plan at the moment to really understand. But as we develop the deliverables, they came from the teams themselves. So that joint working and them understanding what they were trying to achieve. And I think that I know that we've taken all of the deliverables and looked at, right, I'm going to use a quick methodology, but is it a quality, is it an improvement? Is it a prevention? Is it a productivity? So we've started to map the deliverables into that, I guess, areas, and so that they can be appropriately reported, because some of them will not be on data, some will be about improvement or achieving the UNICEF gold standard, for example, in maternity. We've achieved that now. So it's almost like a tick. It's not a data-driven exercise. So, but happy to take that on.
Thanks, Lorraine. David, did you want to come in on that point?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's a good question when you're thinking about how do you take a document as complex as that to try and get it across the organisation. I think that there's two things. One, not all of it is relevant to everybody within the organisation, and therefore people are not only being involved in generating what goes into the report in terms of the local nature of ownership, but also recognises what then gets committed through it. The other aspect to it is that it's generally not. There are always some things new that come into the ADP that are of particular focus one year to the next. But by and large, if you're in TTG or you're working in outpatients and you're working in the specialties that are there, or you're working in psychological therapies, then what's in front of you and what you're trying to improve and why you're trying to get performance in the right direction is an inherent part of what you're doing from one year to the next. What we have to do is formally go through and commit to say, okay, within these timeframes, how far can we get? And I think the questions around can we be explicit in terms of where those targets sit in the comments that were made earlier on, I think were really helpful, and that's something we'll definitely extrapolate.
Thanks, David. Alex, I'll bring you in, please.
Yeah, I was actually going to build on what Jerry had said in terms of targets, because what I would have liked to have seen KPIs included in this is it would never be a one-pager because there's too many. But certainly a few pages of this is the targets, here's what we think is a realistic target, here's the stretch target, and then for the next year, that stretch target hopefully becomes a realistic target for the next year, and so you build. And eventually you get to the national target. For some things, we may never get there, I don't know. But it was an opportunity to try to do that so we could demonstrate not just to the board, but to the workforce that this is how we're going to get there over a period of time. Bearing in mind that the first target has to be realistic, because there's nothing more demoralising for our staff group than to be looking at a target that when they're sitting there looking at it going, we're never going to get that. And then they just stop, they give up. So, I mean, some people would say set an easy target. I'm not saying that, but certainly something that is definitely achievable. But where's my KPIs? Need to see the KPIs. That's the other thing. Thank you.
I'll just come back on that, Sarah. I think in the spreadsheet that I think Jerry referred to, we have got that detailed targets. We call it Mary. I don't know why, but that is our spreadsheet that's held in the background that details all the targets, etc. But I'm happy to share some of that detail in FRP at the September meeting, Alex. But there is still some work to do on what is that internal targets as I described.
Thanks, Lorraine. I've got a couple of questions. One is around the local choices. I know we're not loving the word choices, but we haven't really found a better alternative at this point. So I'll use that for now. And my other one ties into what seems to be the theme of today's meeting, which is about what are we looking at, when and how and why, and how do we sort of present the information to the board. So just around, and this is picking up some of the narrative in the S-bar, where we talk about progressing the choices work locally, and not requiring further approval at a national level. I wonder, this maybe for someone else to pick up, Lorraine, I wonder if we can just outline what that will be like for communities. Obviously, some of our communities will have experience of us engaging with them around changes to various services, but I wonder if we can just pick up what we anticipate that will look like in terms of progressing those choices locally. So that's my first question. And my second part, not a question, but it's maybe just something else for us to take offline and consider in terms of how we bring things back to the board for that assurance piece. I know there's work that already takes place regionally and nationally for some services, and that will obviously continue. And I wonder if we have enough or the right level of focus on that at board level. So how do we as a board get assurance around regional delivery and how that fits for us? in terms of delivering our targets and what we want for our communities. So I'm happy that we take away the regional piece and discuss that offline, but some feedback around choices, and I can see Fiona's got her hand up, so Fiona, I'll bring you in, please.
Thank you. I was just thinking about that one and thinking that's a relatively tough one. I'm happy to take that one. I mean, I think that the government, in the way that they've progressed, the way they want us to consider our financial position, have been also really clear that the way that we do change has to follow existing guidance and expectations of the major service change processes that have been laid out by Healthcare Improvement Scotland. And so therefore, I would suggest that the way that we will be discussing any consideration of change with communities will be through the locality delivery groups that have been established in Highland in recent months, which I think is a really positive step forward. We know that they've been up and running in Argyll and Bute for some years, and they really enable a conversation that's much more service focused than the conversations that we've traditionally had through our community planning partnership locality groups, much more into the nuts and bolts of delivery, and able to really engage with communities and other interested parties within locality areas about delivery. So I think that's where I would say the conversation needs to be directed through. In terms of the regional conversation, I'm not sure that mechanism exists. I think it's an interesting point. I think there are conversations that are going on, both as I've referenced through the regional group, but also the National Planning Board, that Lorraine's got another hat that she wears in regard of that too. So I think how we coordinate all of that feedback to bring assurance back to boards of the consideration of innovation, change, pathway redesign into potentially regional or national solutions of things that we're currently doing. I think we'll need to give that some thought, but I think it's a great question, and we can go away and take that away to think about it.
Okay, good. Thank you, Fiona. Okay, I am not seeing any other hands up, so I'm just going to sort of bring us back to the S-bar and just refocus people on the ask here. So as I said, we've seen this a few different times in different stages of readiness, but it is in front of us today for approval by the board, so that's an important thing to note. And just on the S-bar, you'll see under the recommendation the proposed level of assurance. So at the moment we are proposing limited assurance, and that is just reflective of the amount of work that lies ahead of us and where we are at this present time. But I would also just draw your attention to what we've discussed in terms of it coming back to FRP for scrutiny and assurance, as the year goes on. And we'll get a 6-monthly update in September as well. So are members happy with that and approving of it? Thank you. Great, lots of thumbs up. Okay, slightly ahead of schedule now. So we pulled it back after the IPQR, so that's quite good. So let's take a lunch break, and I will see everybody back here in half an hour. So we'll say 12:55.
Thank you.